Thank you very much, Marilou, not only for the invitation, not only for the chance to be here, but also for all the work you are doing, not only today, but continuously for many, many years as we collaborate. I think that women, peace and security has a name worldwide, and that's connected with Marilou. So thanks a lot for all your efforts. So it can be applauded. Okay. What a privilege. So the invitation to this event was, of course, a good reason to rethink and to reread the Beijing Agenda of Action again. And I decided, because all of us will reflect on some of the topics, and I decided to reflect on women in war, unfortunately, because there is a lot to do at the moment, I think. And when I went through the agenda, first of all, I have to mention that I'm also a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. And recently I wrote a report on sexual violence as a tactic of war, because we faced that in Ukraine. We faced that and we still face it. And it is not an individual thing between two people. No, it's really, there are orders to do so. And what I suggested in my report is that it has to be taken so serious that we really managed, when we as Council of Europe introduced the Register of Damage, which is a register where everybody from Ukraine can register damages. And at the first idea, it was a register for infrastructural damages, for losses in houses and schools and health services. And because of this report, we made it much broader. It's also a damage if somebody gets raped. It's also an individual damage if somebody is a survivor of sexualized violence in war. And so to be happy about it is a little bit crazy, of course, but I think it is important that also such things can be reported and will be followed up, because this register is a kind of basis for to make evidence ready for court, that it really can become court cases. And when it comes to sexual violence in wartime, so in conflicts, it's not the individual soldier who has to be held accountable only. It's really the command, the chain of command. It goes up to Putin, if you want, like that, and many in between, and to have the possibility to really bring these cases to court as well. So beside that, what I also do in this regard is I'm also chairperson of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Austrian National Assembly, and also member of the Justice Committee. And so I also advocate that in the International Criminal Court, there is a fund for victims of atrocities. I already made Austria twice to pay earmarked money, not a big amount, but at least some amount, earmarked money for survivors of violence, of sexualized violence, also in the case of Ukraine. And I think that's something that might help the one or the other, not only to overcome a trauma, but also to find a kind of justice. And I think it's also totally important to have this idea of justice into our mind, because it's not about revenge, it's about justice when we go to court with things like that. When I looked at the strategic objective 2, which is to reduce excessive military expenditures and control the availability of armaments, that's of course a drama, because I think we really go the opposite way at the moment because of this war of aggression Russia is doing in Ukraine. You know that not only within the European Union, but also within NATO, there are goals to increase budgets and funding for military expenditure. There is a goal which is 2%. And if I compare that with the goal for development cooperation, which is 0.7% of gross domestic product, it's of course a disaster. And we see that Many states are much more willing to follow this 2% goal easier and quicker than we do that with the development cooperation money, with the official development assistance money, where, for instance, even my country, Austria, never met this goal, not by far. We are at 0.38 at the moment. And of course, in the aftermath of COVID and of all that crisis we have, and even if Austria is a neutral country, even we spend now more money in armament and in ammunition. And that is, of course, a disaster. And I'm really afraid we have our new government is just a week old, so we do not have a new budget. But I'm quite sure that it will be really a battle, and I use the word battle in that, to at least stay stable with our development money, as I really am frightened that also we will shift, as many other countries, even those who were the forerunners for so long, Sweden. Of course, Sweden joined NATO, and Sweden, of course, also is now shifting a lot of money from development cooperation to other things, and that's really a problem. And I think the only solution lies, on the one hand, of course, in a sustainable, just peace in Ukraine, with the involvement of Ukraine, of course, with a say for Ukraine, and to overcome these thinking that still comes from Cold War, to have a deterrent balance, especially dangerous when it comes to nuclear weapons, because we know how destroyable they can be. And finally, and maybe this is a long association, because at the first view you wouldn't think about a war in this regard, but even if it's not aligned with international humanitarian law, there is war against women in countries like Iran and Afghanistan, where women are deprived from their possibility to get education after the 6th grade, where even students, for instance, of medical faculties are not allowed to take any exams anymore. But we know that in Afghanistan, for instance, it's only okay if a woman doctor treats, or a woman nurse treats a woman. It's nothing for men. And if they stop now to educate women, to take care about other women, we know that medical services will decrease. And we have Afghanistan, for instance, with the highest maternal mortality rate already at the moment, and even that will increase further because of the lack of even midwives are not allowed to work anymore. So it's really, really crazy. And what I'm doing in this regard is, it's another hat. I'm also a member of Parliamentarians for Global Action. We work a lot with the International Criminal Court, and we try to amend the Rome Statute, which is the basis for the International Criminal Court, with the offense of gender apartheid, because that's exactly what's happening in Iran and in Afghanistan. And I very much hope that we will be successful and help women to gain justice with this new offense. Thank you.
20 seconds to go. That was beautifully timed. Thank you so much, Petra. Really appreciate it. Next to you, another wonderful parliamentarian from Finland, former health minister in Finland, Eva, and I won't say the last name correct. Biaudet. Eva? We say D, but you should say D, but D. Okay, thank you. Over to you, Eva.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marilou, and thank you for this wonderful introduction, actually, to our theme. I actually was 34 years old when Beijing meeting took place, and I remember I was a new parliamentarian. I had been elected in 91 as a young politically activist into the Finnish parliament, and I would very much have wanted to go there, but there was only one from my party, and she was, of course, deserving to go there because she had a long history in fighting for women's rights and human rights, and she also was a good model for me in many ways. And I think this is one of the perhaps things that we perhaps need to remember at this moment where we feel that we are in a way going backwards, or not in a way, but we are in many ways, that actually also the things we have achieved are based on really generations of women, both from the civil society, but also in politics. I think one particular feature that I have found during my perhaps 30 years in politics is that that it's absolutely necessary to do cross-party cooperation, that women should not oblige to be divided by the political parties, and try behind the scenes or around the corner or open frontally work together, because that's how I feel that many of the big progressive sort of reforms have happened, that we actually have been more together, female parliamentarians in the parliament, than are male. And it's not that men politicians usually wouldn't say it's not important, but in the end, when it comes to the final, fight, it really has to be, you have to feel that it's absolutely essential to keep it on the top of the agenda. So I think that I would like to encourage to remember this, that we still, and today perhaps, need more international cooperation and support, and also to those who are really living in difficult political situations. And of course, we know that 2/3 of the population in the world actually live in authoritarian countries. So that's not even on a higher level of achieving gender equality, but that's really complete lack of freedom. I mean, we just mentioned a few earlier, but I mean, we all, of course, see Afghanistan as one of the most horrific situations, and of course, all the places where women are under war. I think that one of the useful things that has happened, or the good things that actually the Beijing Platform for Action, I think, was very instrumental to, was that we have eventually created a lot of structures, both sort of multinational norms, and we have built upon a sort of a norms-based world with conventions and legal norms, but we have also created monitoring mechanism, reporting structures, international meetings, where we actually oblige countries to look at their sort of development and to have to measure up what is going on. And I think that also civil society, of course, is very much party to that. And in Finland, we actually do every year, the NGO do this kind of shadow report also to the Beijing goals, is sort of doubling the one the government is doing. I think the structures, and I think perhaps if you look at violence against women, of course, and that's of course a whole complete range of different kinds of violence. But that's perhaps, I think, the one area that, despite of a lot of legislation, and we're all the time trying to find new ways. And in Finland we are continuously trying to find new ways on looking at legislation and criminalizing violence and becoming better to investigate and make accountability. We still have not managed to stop the violence, and not even stop the violence in our closest relations. Of course, we have these new forms in the open space, which also restrict us, but it's absolutely unacceptable that we have not been able to stop the violence from our dearest and closest people. And I think that's something that we must think more about. And of course, at the moment, when we see that young people are their ideas again about relationships, about sex, about women, is sort of influxed with sort of misinformation and very strange role models with lots of violence. I really I fear for that we are not paying enough attention to educate and to talk about, relations in a way we think, in a respectful way, in a dignified way. Marilou, I don't know where I am in time-wise, but still. Yeah, great, thank you. And I think that's really enormously important. I have 4 children and 2 boys and 2 girls, and I always felt that I've been teaching them or sort of trying to be a parent in a similar way. But of course, I see now when they are adults, and I am a grandmother of 3, that of course they are. I have not always been able to relate to them in a gender sensitive but still neutral way. And I think that's also a reminder that we all are, despite of our gender or whatever gender we are also influenced by this sort of environment where we live in. And I think that's perhaps one of the keys where we could actually reach out to men who are not too active in gender equality, enhancing gender equality, to see that it's not something that, it's in the male genes. It's really something about learn models, lack of good models of a diverse way of being a man. And I think that really if we really would investigate in how to stop violence, we need to look at the male norms and the male models and provide men more ways of being good men. One key, actually, I think, is to make them more of family members, fathers, brothers, taking care of the care work. And there, of course, legislation is crucial. And I think like sharing parental leaves in the first place is enormously important, but sharing them in an equal way gives them a sort of privilege to be close members of the family and equally important to their children. And that will keep them also in a sort of better in their health, living longer and happier. And and somehow we need to come to this, that we all would feel that it's an advantage for all to become much better at gender equality and gender equality policies.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask my sister senator, Dr. Gigi Osler from Manitoba, to be our next speaker.
Thank you, Senator McPhedran, and thank you to everyone for being here today and this incredible panel. My name, as you heard, is Flordeliz. I'm often called Gigi Osler. I'm the Canadian-born daughter of immigrant parents, and my pronouns are she, her. My home city in Canada is located on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation. And I'm absolutely delighted and honored to be here today as a Canadian senator to reflect on the last 30 years of progress. And I've written my notes down so I don't forget anything. But to walk you through what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Canada has done in relation to gender-based violence, talk a little bit about what we can do together, and I'm going to finish with a bit of a call to action for all of us. But I want to start with a quote from Canada's ambassador to the UN, Bob Rae, who I think summed up a little bit of the existential threat facing all of us. And Ambassador Rae is the current president of the Economic and Social Council as well. We need to understand the existential crisis which is in front of the global system. And we need to understand that it's going to require an extraordinary effort on all our parts to ensure that the system keeps working for the billions of people who live in the world. And we need to understand that this is no ordinary time or ordinary moment. And we would be making a mistake, a complacent mistake, if we failed to really appreciate both the challenge, but also the opportunity that we have to do things better, to do things more efficiently, to stop worrying about turf and silos, and to start worrying more about what we need to do and do together, end quote. So Canada has taken a meaningful legislative and policy approach and steps to advance gender equality. The foundation of these rights is enshrined in the Canada Human Rights Act and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. At the federal level, these rights are reinforced through key laws and regulations, including the Employment Equity Act, the Pay Equity Act, the Canadian Gender Budgeting Act, and the Canadian Labour Code. We apply gender-based analysis plus lens in policy development to ensure that gender is examined alongside intersections like race, indigeneity, disability, and socioeconomic status. We have an ambassador for women, peace, and security because women's full participation in conflict resolution results in a more sustainable peace. Peace promotes and protects women's and girls' human rights, gender equality, empowerment, and reduces gender-based violence and sexual exploitation. Canada's National Action Plan to end gender-based violence aligns with our international commitments and focuses on prevention, survivor support, and legal reforms. The action plan's shared ultimate outcomes are to reduce gender-based violence, or GBV, and to improve health, economic, social, and justice outcomes for those impacted by GBV. Where appropriate and feasible, our provinces and territories collect disaggregated data to allow for the reporting of results across diverse populations. Following the first round of progress reporting, the baseline was set in September 2024, with future annual reporting from the federal government's Women and Gender Equality Ministry. And we might be seeing Minister Ian later today.
She's on.
Yeah, she's our minister, our wage minister. But progress does not come without pain. Gender-based violence remains pervasive. Data from the Canadian Women's Foundation illustrates the urgency of our work. In Canada, 1 in 4 women have experienced some form of intimate partner violence in their lifetime, and 1 woman or girl is killed every 48 hours. We also continue to have a crisis of violence against Indigenous women, girls, and against Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQI+ people. The homicide rate for Indigenous women in Canada is almost 6 times higher than that for other women. The 2019 National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls formulated 231 calls to justice aimed at all levels of government, civil society, and all Canadians, with the goal of ending the violence. Now, looking at the global context, many of these challenges are not unique to Canada. We are all witnessing a disturbing global trend of gender equality backsliding. Political polarization and populism have emboldened efforts to roll back women's rights, restricting access to sexual and reproductive health care, limiting protections against violence, and undermining the institutions that safeguard human rights. Economic uncertainty further compounds gender inequalities, with women facing disproportionate job losses, unpaid caregiving responsibilities, and declining social protections. Disinformation and digital threats target women, especially politicians, leaders, journalists, and activists, in attempts to intimidate and silence their voices. Despite challenges, we must remain hopeful and resist. As we heard yesterday at the annual IPU UN Women CSW side event, let 2025 be the year we refuse to give up. But in order to move forward, we must stop the backsliding. Progress isn't permanent unless it is protected. We must advance women's representation in politics, building on global progress towards gender parity in parliaments. We must strengthen investments in social protection and healthcare to guarantee that no one is left behind, particularly people and communities made vulnerable. And we must safeguard democracy and democratic institutions to protect our rights and freedoms. So, friends and colleagues, let 2025 be the year where we refuse to be complacent, we refuse to go back, and we continue to fight for equality for all genders in all our diversities. Thank you. Merci, miigwech.
Thank you so much. I also want to take just a quick moment to say that we are definitely hoping that Minister Marcy Ian can join us. You've all traveled to New York. You all understand the plane was a little late. They're going to try their absolute best to get her here. And when she does hopefully arrive, I'll make sure that we take a moment and introduce her. But without further ado, I'd like to both welcome our colleague from the United Kingdom, from the House of Lords, Baroness Elizabeth Sugg, to bring comments to you today. Liz.
Thank you very much, Marilou. And it's great to be here today and talk to you really about the perspective of the UK on Beijing. I'm very grateful to Senator McPhedran and our Canadian friends for hosting us. And it's great to follow Gigi. And I think governments from around the world have a lot to learn from Canada's approach to that gender focus. And as we mark 30 years since the adoption, I think we need to reflect on the progress, but also the challenges which very clearly still remain. But it was a groundbreaking moment. I was 18 when the declaration was adopted, just beginning my journey and my interest in this area. And it's been great on my journey to meet many of the women who worked so hard to achieve Beijing and really learn from their work and their contributions. And so whilst it's not a legally binding document like CEDAW, Beijing really has, I think, helped make sure that parliaments like mine can make progress in these areas and really helps me in my work as a parliamentarian trying to champion the rights of women and girls. And from the UK's standpoint, we have made some notable strides, particularly in areas such as violence against women, access to justice, and addressing the socioeconomic inequalities. But as I've been thinking through what to say today, it really is apparent all the challenges that still remain. It's very clear we haven't got there yet. And so speaking first about violence against women, we have tried to make that a priority in the UK, both from a policy and legislative perspective. We've seen some good progress over the last 3 decades. We've had some good acts like the Domestic Abuse Act in 2021, which provided better protection for victims and a better, broader definition of what domestic abuse is, looking at not just physical violence, but the emotional and economic abuse as well. And while we've seen some legislative advances, the prevalence is still growing. Like in Canada, in the UK, 1 in 4 women have experienced domestic abuse in their lifetime, and the levels of sexual violence and harassment that we're seeing continue to be really worryingly high. And we've really looked at the call from Beijing for data collection and research, and we all know that unless we understand what's happening in our countries, we're not going to be able to tackle it. So we've done more trying to track and understand the extent of violence against women, but we've got to do more, particularly, I think, for women in marginalised groups such as women of colour, disabled women, and those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, that they're not only heard but also protected by our systems. And so looking at that socioeconomic inequality is another big focus of Beijing. Again, we've made some progress to narrowing the gender pay gap, with recent figures showing a decline in the overall pay disparity, but yet again, it still remains. We've tried to introduce policies like shared parental leave and increased representation of women in leadership roles and in parliament and in business. And that's all, I think, helped to contribute to narrowing the gender gap. But again, we're still seeing those challenges. We're still seeing women disproportionately represented in low-paid, part-time work and precarious employment like zero-hour contracts. And COVID-19, of course, exacerbated all of those inequalities, with women much more likely to bear the brunt of all the caring responsibilities and the frontline jobs as well. And that intersectional nature of inequality often, again, means that women from ethnic minorities and those with disabilities face even greater economic disadvantage. And as parliamentarians, we've really got to make sure that the policies that we implement are not just well-intentioned, but also really work to address those really deeply ingrained structural barriers. I've also been looking at the access to justice and legal protections for victims of gender-based violence. And again, we've seen some good improvements on the availability of support services for survivors and the establishment of special domestic violence courts, which have been a really positive step forward. But our legal system is not without its flaws. There's a lack of legal aid for some survivors, and there's still significant obstacles to justice there. And I really think we need a holistic approach that considers the specific needs of survivors, and that's more pressing than ever. In recent weeks in the UK, we've also tried to keep up with technology, which of course is, advancing at an incredible rate. We've had some good progress on looking at abuse online for women, particularly with, really extreme pornography and deep fakes. So we've changed the law there, but, we've got to keep moving fast as we're seeing that technology improve. And we've really got to acknowledge that having a robust and accessible legal system for survivors isn't just about the laws that we enact, but also that support system that accompanies them, through whether that's through housing or mental health services or economic empowerment. And then my final point really is the importance of collaboration with civil society. And we've seen civil society, our personal experience of this, what a crucial role that civil society plays in helping us all advance gender equality. And women's rights organisations and other advocacy groups who I work with on a daily basis have been really pivotal in pushing for these reforms and helping raise awareness of issues like domestic abuse and sexual harassment, and helping provide really vital services for survivors. And I think in what we're facing today, that partnership with these organisations are even more important to making sure that the voices of those affected are heard and that they're acted upon. And again, as parliamentarians, we've got to continue to support and amplify the work of civil society organisations, making sure that we're not just consulting with them, but also that we're empowering them to be those kind of partners in the process of change. And so 30 years since the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, it's great that we've seen this progress, but we've really got to be honest about those ongoing challenges and the gaps that remain. It was a bold declaration of the just society that we all want to see, and what society should really look like for women. But its true success really will depend on how effectively that we all, as legislators, as global citizens, as women, really continue to implement its principles and expand its reach. Petra spoke a bit about the development assistance, and in the UK, we were very proud that we had 0.7. That went down to 0.5 a couple of years ago, and now, sadly, recently down to 0.3 because of the defence increase. And I completely agree that we've got to work cross-party, both in our home countries, but also internationally, to try to make the case for that continued support. I strongly believe that in the UK, we've got this brilliant opportunity, but also a huge responsibility to try to lead by example and to push for stronger protections of women, to eliminate GBV and to address those socio-economic inequalities that we know continue to hold women back. And we've really got to ensure that the Beijing vision isn't just a set of ideals, but really becomes a lived reality for women everywhere.
Thank you so much for that, Liz. And now I'd like to invite our colleague. A number of us have had a number of delegation experiences with Guillaume. He is the president of the European Parliamentary Forum. And we have, I think, some colleagues here. I'm going to just take a moment before Guillaume speaks to ask parliamentarians in the room to stand for a moment so you can see who is here with us, please. And Senator Dasko. Thank you. Everyone knows how difficult it is to juggle the schedule, so it's really great to see this room packed. Over to you, Guillaume.
Thank you a lot, dear Marilou, dear colleagues, and hi, everybody. It's sincerely a pleasure to be here with you as each year in the Canadian mission. Our link between our two countries are very special, and I follow with few words in French, especially pour la francophonie, bien entendu, et nos deux pays. Bonjour. La francophonie. And it's important. C'est très important parce que c'est le partage de nombreuses valeurs en commun et c'est toujours un immense plaisir et une joie de retrouver nos amis canadiens pour poursuivre un grand nombre de combats dans le monde. And now I follow in English, but try and try. It will be long enough, especially for my English. But no, thank you a lot. And with an important question you ask us today, dear Marilou, about the evaluation of Beijing Plus 30 program and the place of us. It's a pleasure to have my president of the Women's Rights Delegation in France, Véronique Riontan, a true leader in France for all this question. And what I see since I prepared this CSW and since I've been here is that Beijing Declaration and Program was a deep change for the international diplomacy spirit and action with very important impact in our national policies. And it's why it was so important to protect, it's so important to protect this international framework and international common framework, I think, and it's why the adoption of the statement of this 69th CSW this year, 30 years after the Beijing meeting and declaration, is so important this year. But without, I don't want to come in our French policy in this moment, because I want to share you several concerns after 4 days with all colleagues here, and I want to share with you several concerns in this moment. First, this framework is not enough known by the people and by the MPs, I think. And I observe that in my own country. I don't know if we have, Véronique, a lot of members of French Parliament that they know this framework of Beijing today. And I observe that because they don't know very well the spins of SDGs. So I think we have a lot of work to do today, especially with the new generation of MP today. Second point, it's this framework is today, and I think it's an important point, very early attacked from the anti-rights movement, masculinist movement, by the Islamist coalition and Russia diplomacy, that it's usual. We know that for several years, but also today by the ultra-conservative movement from the USA since especially by the election of Donald Trump and this new administration of Donald Trump. And since I've been here, I hear a lot of things about Beijing, but especially a lot of things about the Geneva consensus and about the Protego program. And that it's my third and I think more important concern. Today, the anti-rights movement and anti-rights coalition have the people, the leaders, they have the money, they have the time, and they have the plan. And all the MPs of this movement know this plan, I think. And it's one of most important work in the EPF organization that we have with nil data. And we observe 3 phases of this plan of the anti-right movement that I want to expose. Phase 1, it's the destruction with a lot of executive orders. Attack against the area include gender ideology, diversity, equity and inclusion program, public education, civil servant, foreign aid, evidence-based medicine and democratic institution, migrant, trans people, LGBTQ people. Phase 2, it's the consolidation with an anti-gender diplomacy priority for religious freedom and demographic nationalism. It's the Elon Musk theory. And phase 3, its creation for an alternative global framework with the Geneva Consensus and Protego program and with a diplomacy based on the deal, the transaction. We observe that. I have the time again.
You're fine.
We observe that with, I share you with, we have several European colleagues in this delegation of EPF this year. And I share you the experience of our Armenian colleague, Arsene, former Minister of Health in Armenia. And he explained us that today the US embassy proposed to the Armenia to still continue to help the Armenia if the Armenia join the Protego protocol. That is the transactional diplomacy of the United States of America, and I think we have to know that, because there is a lot of consequences about the sexual and reproductive rights, about the normalization of the anti-gender services, and the extension of the global gag rule. And in this moment, I think we have to face to this common emergency, and we have to defend the Beijing program and Beijing platform. But we have to go further. We have to diffuse this platform, and we have to do this very quickly to protect the women's right, the girls' right, the LGBT, the trans, the minority people rights. I hope we will have the capacity to the possibility to speak about that during the next international forum in Paris about the foreign feminist diplomacy at the end of July, at the beginning of July, and you are, dear colleagues, all invited to this moment as the society civil organization, and because I think we have to create new action and with a very important volonté, et c'est pourquoi on est venu avec, on va dire, un mot d'ordre, celui de garder et d'allumer le plus possible les lumières pour les droits des femmes, to still continue to turn on the lights for women's rights, and to keep the Canadian word at the beginning of this meeting. Elbows up. It's elbows that. Up. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Guillaume, and thank you, every panelist. Really learned from you and really appreciate the thought that you put into your presentations. You're not quite done yet. I'm going to be asking our respondent, the Honorable Patty Torsney, who will have as much time as the others. I think up to you. Do you want to speak there or at the podium? I think so. Yeah. But after Patty is finished, I'm going to ask, it's really quick, it's one question. If you as a parliamentarian could do one thing in the context of your parliamentary work that would actually address the world's pandemic of gender-based violence, one thing, wave your magic wand as a parliamentarian, what would that be? Thank you so much. And now to Patty Torsney, please.
Thank you so much. Perhaps that's the problem. As they say, unplug, replug. First of all, thank you all for being here. Je suis très heureuse d'être avec vous. Je suis Patty Torsney, une ancienne députée. Et quand j'étais 32, je suis à Beijing. When I was 32, I was in Beijing as a new member of parliament. Yes. But I wanted to say that because as I looked out at this room and I thought about the power of civil society working with parliamentarians, my heart just skipped a little beat when I think of all the older women who mentored me and made such a difference, and the energy that's in this room amongst all of you of all ages to reinforce the things that were accomplished and to protect the things that were accomplished in Beijing. There's a lot of power here. In 1995, there were no parliaments that had gender equality, and now there are 6. Rwanda, Andorra, the UAE, Cuba, Mexico, and Nicaragua. And the Canadian Senate, that's right. Their number of women speakers was just 10.5% in the world, and now we're at 23.7%. In 1995, only 5 countries had more than 30% women in parliament, and now there are 71. There are gender parity in cabinets, and there are many more gender-sensitive parliaments. So that's the good news. The not so good news is that we have really plateaued in gaining women's numbers in many parliaments. Last year, though there were 73 countries that had national elections, they only, and they did better than they had in their previous elections by some good numbers, only 0.3% growth. And we thought last year and the year before weren't great in terms of the growth. So it's really plateaued and we have to do much better. We at the Inter-Parliamentary Union study these issues. We produce these great, in English and French and a few other languages, the maps on women in parliaments and an analysis of what's happening all over the country. Guillaume, ça c'est pour vous. And it's all of our stuff is online. We've also recognized what's working in various countries like quotas and that they have a domino effect in ensuring progressive policies. I also I'm also going to respond to some of the things that the others have spoken about because a few things struck me. In all of the presentations compared to 1995, we're hearing more about the differentiation. Women aren't just one big blob and men are another big blob. Now we're hearing about the need to go further, to go deeper. I am the child of immigrants in Canada, and I had a lot of privilege as a result. Some challenges, but many more privileges than that. And the Parliament itself and many of my colleagues that were women parliamentarians at the time defined ourselves a little bit by our differences. But now we're seeing even more differences, and that will lead to better policies, better outcomes, because we're able to see the differences. Women, so even here, we've talked about how to look at the issues much more specifically than we did in 1995. And I think the other key thing in many countries where it's working, we need to support those in countries where there isn't such a strong civil society, NGO community. Parliamentarians, it used to be a bit more of a struggle between parliamentarians and CSOs, but now we realize by working with CSOs, by working with NGOs, you can have them go and talk to your colleagues who aren't on board and to make these election issues and you can get change. So many of the parliamentarians here this morning talked about that. And I think there is an opportunity to share that experience with countries that don't have such a good CSO community. Petra talked a lot about, and others talked about the war against women, which I think in many places is on the rise, but also looking at women in war and being able to talk about in a very different way these issues about what the choice of spending is, right? We're not just saying, oh yeah, we have to do better. We're saying, look, there's a clear choice. Are we spending on armaments? Are we spending on development? And if you haven't had a chance, on the 3rd floor by the General Assembly, there's a wall that has very specific description, what we spend on armaments in 24 hours, what we spend on development, what we spend on the UN trying to make the world a better place. Not perfection, just more survivable. In 1995, the Beijing meeting was part of a trio of meetings. There was the Copenhagen Summit on Social Development, which talked about a lot of these issues, and the Cairo Conference, which I also got to go to. I was a very lucky MP. But we are now seeing, as Guillaume has said, now an attack on some of these rights all around the world. And as you were talking, Senator Osler, I was struck by the fact that some of this differentiation of women and of populations is becoming unacceptable in certain countries. How far and how far backwards are we getting? So we really need to protect this space to talk about women and to talk about these issues because it will be better for everyone in society. The role of education, both that mentorship that many of you in this room are doing, for the parliamentarians themselves so that they understand what these issues were and what the fight was about before. The role of sharing best practices so we can have parliaments like the Nordics have had for years where there is parental leave, where you have substitutions for members so that people can have lives. And we were working for so long to get more women in parliaments, and now we realize what was happening to women in parliaments. And the IPU started about 6 or 8 years ago looking at the violence against women parliamentarians. The British have done a ton of work on this issue because sadly they have been so very much affected, all men and women parliamentarians, but specifically women parliamentarians. And they are seeing that not only are women, and we're seeing it in Canada too, not only were women afraid to go into politics, not afraid, but just not interested to live in that environment, but also we are seeing women leave because there is too much violence. They don't need to put up with it across party lines. So we can do better. And I think that we need to make sure that we're sharing information, that we're as organized as those who are in the anti-rights movement have become, to make sure that we are elbows up protecting the gains that have been made. I would like to thank Senator Feinstein, who was the first to commit in Beijing that Canada would do gender-based analysis of policies. It's been unevenly applied throughout the years. And I'd like to give you 2 examples of things where we have seen progress and an attack, but still some progress. In the Gambia in 2015, they banned female genital mutilation. And yet last year, there was a push to make it legal again. And so we, the Inter-Parliamentary Union, worked with parliamentarians to try and help them protect against female genital mutilation. And it was work that was done with other parliaments, but particularly in Egypt, where they were able to share experiences about why you needed to continue to ban FGM. And so, again, women working cross-party lines, cross-country lines made a big difference. In Tanzania, they've actually passed legislation that when there's violence toward women or to candidates, sexually based violence toward candidates, that it is a further sanction and it is against the law. So they're protecting that space for people to run for office. And then, of course, there's legislation around people who are in office. But still, we're not doing enough. Still, there has to be more recognition of women who are stepping up in media, in civil society organizations, in parliaments to recognize there is a difference when they step forward and they are attacked. And there was a reporter this morning from Canada that I was listening to, Rachel Gilmore, talking about what happened when she reported on things that the certain, well, they were right wing, and they were not just right wing, but they were, help me, Marilou, they were people that were. They were misogynist, that's true. But they were attacking her on very specific ways. And police forces and others have to work together with these women who are standing up to protect them. Alors, nous avons beaucoup d'informations sur uip.org. And we are very happy that this opportunity is here. And I'm very happy to have stood on the shoulders of many of you who are in this room and to be inspired by all of you who are here. And I have one last thing. In the next 24 hours, actually, no, by midnight, every single person in this room needs to call a member of parliament, a provincial, a city councillor, and say thank you. Or I like what you're doing, because the haters call in great numbers. They always call. They always drown the staff with all kinds of horrible messages. So we can change the dialogue. We can all call someone and say, thanks, way to go, keep it up. I like what you're doing on gun control. I like what you're doing to prevent violence. All of us have that in our power. It doesn't cost any money. Go out and do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Patty, thank you so much. It really hold a lot of things together. I think I can speak for all of us when I say that. I want to take a moment now also to ask, apropos of what Patty said in acknowledging that she was at Beijing, but I know we have others here who are at Beijing. Could we please have our elders who were at Beijing in 1995, please stand. We can give her, this is Mary Scott. The clapping, you may not have heard that. That was Mary Scott from Winnipeg, Manitoba. Okay, got your magic wands out? All right. I think maybe this time we'll go in reverse order, and I'll ask Guillaume if there was one thing as a parliamentarian, bit of a magic wand, like what would you choose to do first in your parliamentary context to end violence against women and girls? You may have already done it with your constitution, but
we have other ID, and so immediately, in few days, we introduce in our, and I hope, in our penal definition of the rape, the notion of consent. And the leader of this proposition is Véronique Creton with Marie-Charlotte Garin. So it's very important. You can up. But and with the constitutionalization for all the world, I think it's a question of the access of the abortion, the freedom to access to the abortion, and I think it's the base because it's what we want to say last year with the constitutionalization. Well, you don't have the access to the abortion. There is no equality between women and men, and not really true democracy.
So this isn't just about ending violence against women, but I would love to see and deliver full and equitable access to all reproductive health services for everyone who needs them, both in my own country, but also to really fight for that for every woman overseas.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna give you two parts to my answer. The first part is what needs to change. And what needs to change are the attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, norms, and social cultures that perpetuate and promote gender-based violence. That's what needs to change. But as a legislator, that is difficult to legislate. I'm going to agree with my panelists and say that in my work as a parliamentarian, it is the right to access sexual and reproductive health care as a right. It's a right to health care, and that includes a right to access abortion. It includes a right to access contraception. It includes comprehensive sexuality education, because that is all what keeps women and diverse groups healthy, and health is a human right.
Is it my turn? Yep. It was really a challenge because, of course, politicians always want to say a lot of things, but I agree with you all, so I may do it there. But I actually wish that we could decide in this world of really diminished funding globally. I think we should target women human rights defenders and advocates for gender equality, because we need more people who will do all this stuff. And of course, for ourselves, we have to keep to be in the forefront every day. But I would actually like to remember the women human rights defenders.
I already mentioned that I'm also active at the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. This is not the European Union, much bigger, including Turkey, Azerbaijan, Iceland, yeah, the big one, the big Europe. And we have a masterpiece. This is the Istanbul Convention. Yeah, exactly. The Istanbul Convention is the gold standard, the legal gold standard, how to combat and fight domestic violence and gender-based violence. And I simply would sign, ratify, implement, allocate, and evaluate the Istanbul Convention globally.
Yeah.
So, easy.
And you
And everybody, it's not only open for members of the Council of Europe. Every country can ratify. There are debates as well. For instance, in Mexico and in Algeria and in other countries. So it's open for everybody. If you need some information,
and it has
let
a
us know.
monitoring.
And it has Grevio as a
mechanism.
monitoring mechanism. Yeah.
I think I'd like to pick up on education and that we educated men and women to understand that equality is good for everybody and that, it's sexy to actually care that you want women who are equal to, and that women's equality is empowering to men as well. And so that's going to take a lot of work. But also that we were actually really focused on building sustainable, peaceful countries. People who have good jobs and good healthcare and happy lives don't want to go to war, and they don't need to look across and take something from someone else. So I think it's more sustainable. I think it costs less money ultimately, and that we could really make a difference for everybody.
I just want to really sincerely thank every one of you, because not only have you given us concise and practical and very comprehensive points for all of us to take away and consider, you have been spot on with your time, which gives us a full 20 minutes. A full 20 minutes for conversation with those of you who've taken the time to be with us today. And please, yes, we'll start. Thanks to Joanna Mikalopoulos and also Elizabeth from here at the mission for making sure. So if you put your hand up, please tell us who you are. Start by introducing so we know who's in the conversation. And then please, if we could, just be mindful of time that we're sharing with each other. Please.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be with you. I'm so impressed. I've been impressed for 3 days. I haven't slept for a month. My name is Nancy from Montreal. I represent BPW, which is Business Professional Women in Montreal, with the colleagues from Canada. I also have my own business, and my question is going to be hopefully very fast. I believe that society is like a family. And when you have a family, if your son doesn't act properly towards your daughter, you teach your son. So I believe in education. Then you train your daughter to respond differently. And that's what I do. I help people to manage conflict, to protect and defend your integrity, whether it's psychologically, emotionally, or physically. So to the point of self-defense with the legal aspect of it and the morality of it, depending obviously on your religion and your concept and values. Thank you so much, by the way, for what you instituted. So my question is, there's also a third part that when the son doesn't stop, or the other sibling, whichever sibling, I don't want to put a son or a daughter identification, it is just easier for the example, but if they keep going, because I don't think we can believe in education right now, like some people don't believe in being respectful towards women. At some point, there has to be a consequence. That's my belief, and a lot of people don't agree with me. There's got to be sanctions.
Could we have your question, please?
Sorry. What would be a consequence to stop men being violent or other women being violent towards women?
Baroness Sugg.
Thank you. I completely agree with you. If there's no consequences, then we're not going to see change. And I look at the example of Andrew Tate at the moment, who has, been he's now here in the US. He's wanted for crimes in the UK. We need to actually prosecute these people. And our young men and women need to see that followed through. So we absolutely need our justice system to go after these people and show that there are consequences to their actions.
Thank you very much. We have folks online, so we're going to thank you. We'll recognize, but we also want to make sure that they're heard. So I'm going to ask Elizabeth if you could share with us a question online.
My turn to mess up with the logistics. So the first question online is, In many countries, legislation has played a crucial role in shaping gender norms and advancing gender equality, from parental leave policies to pay equity laws and protections against gender-based violence. Legal frameworks can challenge traditional norms and promote more equitable societies. However, laws alone are not always enough to drive meaningful change. In your experience as politicians, what are the most effective legislative approaches to influencing gender norms? What key obstacles, whether cultural, political, or institutional, stand in the way of these efforts, and how can they be overcome?
That's what you call a comprehensive question. Okay, and Petra's ready for it. And then Eva.
I'll try. No, I'll try to make it at one example, that is female genital mutilation, where we see that we are successful, and it's very hard anchored in norms, not in religion, in norms, in masculinity. And there, where we really not only have laws, but really convince society by society, village by village, school by school, and make people understand what it does with women, and make them understand that that it impacted women the whole life, physically, psychology, in any negative way. There we really have good results when it's the people self who take the decision to stop it, to ban it, and to then also they are in line with laws. I think that to convince people, and education, of course, is key for that. Is, I think, the best way forward.
Thank you, Eva, Guillaume, and then Gigi.
Thank you. I think this was really important. When we have tried to make studies on how far we are progressing in areas where we think we are very far, it actually is one of the obstacles that researchers say is that we think gender equality is already there. And we think it's only necessary to think that we are gender equal. But actually, it's not so easy. And you really have to have systematic and very sort of ambitious goals and to measure up your approach and your successes or failures. And you don't always have the answers, but only if you do this, then you can sort of find the new answers. The other thing I think is it's extremely important with these legislatory measures that shows where the line goes, which is what is wrong and what is right. But of course, it's also necessary to train the police force, to have it under public prosecution. It does not have to be the victim who makes the move. You should not have to be the one that carries responsibility for the accountability of the perpetrator, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. Guillaume.
Yes, complex question. Question complexe sur les deux. But it's important to have an exchange about how to change our societies and durably, if I can say. It's important to have the economy and policy independence. It's important to have the right to control on the own body, the importance of the access to abortion. It's important to have the most important legislation struggle against the base gender violences. And it's important to develop today in each country the complete sexual educative program. And we observe that for the anti-right movement, it's certainly the most important fight to attack the CSE. We observed that in Philippines with Marilou, Liz, Eva a few weeks ago. In our each countries, for example, in France, we present a few weeks ago the national program for the complete sexual education, and we observe a lot of attack from this movement with the same word that we observe in Philippines or in other country here or there. And I think there is a true, it's important that the United Nations agencies, we as a member of parliament, are in the action to protect the development of this program.
We're going to come back to the room for a question. Thank you. I see it at the back. We're going to start here and we'll work our way back. Introduce, please.
Hi, my name is Mary and I'm from Winnipeg. Okay, hi. Hi, my name is Messi Haile Jesus, the founder of Canadian Centre for Empowerment. We are the only agency addressing economic abuse. So my question is for the UK House of Lords. UK explicitly recognized economic abuse in Domestic Abuse Act in 2021, which is so wonderful, and defining economic abuse, which include controlling access of money, employment, housing. And in addition to that, the financial institutions are required to support victims through UK Financial Code of Practice, which we are right now advocating in Canada to adopt. So my question for you is, what were the key challenges in integrating economic abuse into Domestic Abuse Act, and how did the parliamentarian address them? Because we are advocating this, I would love to learn from you about. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And it was a really important part of that Domestic Abuse Act. And it was one of the hardest things actually to get in. And the primary issue around it was education. You know, if you haven't experienced it, if you don't know someone who's experienced it, you don't understand it. And I'm afraid quite a lot of the male parliamentarians couldn't even kind of conceive of the idea of it. So actually the way we did it was through CSOs and women's organisations who enabled us to give real life examples. And we actually brought people in who had been victims of this abuse. You could actually educate parliamentarians on it. So I think it was a really good example for me of how real people with real experience need to get involved in our legislative process. So I'd encourage you to absolutely do as much of that as you can.
Gigi.
And from a Canadian perspective, and what you're describing is a form of coercive control, which is a form of abuse. And certainly in our parliament, more parliamentarians are aware of coercive control, and we are hearing that inform many of the legislative, much of the laws and legislation that we are coming forward and that we're debating. So a very important concept for parliamentarians to be aware of.
And I'll just jump in on that before our next question and just remind everyone, I know many of you in this room know this already, but the research that's been done on the single most effective investment to counter gender-based violence, and the research was done in 54 countries, was to invest in organizations operating at the local level, run by women with a feminist set of values. And that's research. That's just not opinion. And I think that's what we're hearing here. To the next question, please. Marian.
Hi, I'm Mary from Winnipeg, Manitoba. So women and girls with disabilities, particularly those living in poverty and in developing countries, face heightened risks of sexual violence due to systemic barriers, lack of legal protections, and limited access to support services. As parliamentarians, what legislative and policy measures do you see as most effective in addressing this crisis? And how can we ensure stronger international cooperation and accountability to protect the rights and safety of these vulnerable groups?
From my experience, it's not so much a problem of legislation. In my country, for instance, legislation would be perfect. Legislation would prohibit any physical barriers to any public building. Legislation would ensure accessibility for all kinds of disabilities. The problem is much more the funding, the allocation of money, and that really these measures, which could be done, we know what to do, we know how to build it, but it's usually the problem of funding, and of course, we have money. It's just a question where we put priority and where we spend it, and I think that it would be very important to really have this as a kind of mainstreaming whenever it comes to people with disabilities, to have them on the table and really to see and to be aware what it means to have special additional challenges. And you mentioned this intersectionality, that often disabled people are poor people, often are marginalized people and are not seen. So to make them more visible and really to have you mentioned it, that it is really an improvement if you have contact with civil society organization that really push you and that really remind you about priorities. I think that could be not a legal, but a necessary practical contribution.
If I just may, I think it's necessary to know more about sexual violence against disabled persons, because and women in particular. At least in Finland, we know that disabled girls in their schools face twice as much as sexual violence as others. And of course, if you are dependent on an assistant, or if you are dependent on living in an institution, some kind of institution or service home, they are always more closer facilities where the risk of abuse is always much bigger. So we have to create particular sort of, whistleblower systems and protection things. And you have to be able to choose your own assistant, to be able to say, no, I don't want this person. There's a lot of particularities, but I also think we need to, in the women's organizations and movement, need to include also the women who fight for the disabled women who want to participate in the women's rights movement.
As a fellow Winnipegger, I want to say thank you for that question. And you really do speak to the importance of looking at intersectionality. And even though, and I spoke about it, even though Canada has a federal policy, the Gender-Based Analysis Plus, to look at legislation and policies at a federal level that considers intersectionality, like race, indigeneity, disability, socioeconomic status, we still know in Canada, if you are a woman with a disability, in particular, if you're a racialized woman with a disability, you still are in the lowest socioeconomic status and the most at risk. And that reminds me of that management policy, that management saying that culture eats policy for breakfast. And culture can also eat legislation for breakfast. And so as we're talking, it is about that bigger need to change hearts, minds, social norms, cultures, attitudes, and beliefs to improve the lot of everyone, not just women, but everyone.
Just very briefly, I think on the international piece as well, we've all got to remember that within these global goals, within the Sustainable Development Goals, is the leave no one behind principle, which really underpins all of them. And as we're seeing these cuts in international development, we've really got to make sure that when we know that cuts disproportionately impact women and girls and those who suffer the most, so we've really got to remember that principle of leave no one behind and make sure we maintain a focus on that.
Let me just add one thing on this, and that is a Canadian example, but it could be happening anywhere. And that is where you see something, as we have in Canada, a very positive step in legislation, creating the Canada Disability Benefit. Lovely, but no money. Nice, great idea in the legislation, in the law, a pittance that the government actually made available as the disability benefit. So to enforce that point, that won't change just by parliamentarians, although we have a job to absolutely work on that. That, again, is when parliamentarians and civil society work together and never quit until the disability is real and helping people. So our next question, please. I think who's got the mic? And please introduce yourself.
Okay. Hi, my name is Brianna Wilson. I am a member of West Bank First Nation located in BC. I'm here as a youth delegate for the United Nations Association in Canada. As an Indigenous woman, I do live in constant fear every time I leave my house. I'm very hypervigilant, always watching, always afraid. Cases like the serial killer in Winnipeg with women ending up in landfills shows how little our lives really seem to matter. So I guess my question for the Canadian parliamentarians is, what will you do to make me and other Indigenous women feel safe in our own country.
First of all, I want to say thank you for being here. I see you. I hear you. I'm not Indigenous, but I am a woman and I share that same fear, not to the same extent. What I can promise to do is work with my colleagues. And one of the beautiful things about our Senate in Canada is not only do we have more than 50% women in the Senate, we have, and I forget what the percentage is. So we have 12% of our senators are Indigenous. And so we continue to have those discussions and have that focus and take the ongoing national crisis facing Indigenous women and girls and 2S LGBTQI plus people to heart. One of our fellow senatrices is Senator Yvonne Bayr, who has worked diligently for years on legislation regarding the forced and coerced sterilization of Indigenous women. So what I can promise you is that I see you, I hear you, I will do everything in my power and ability to continue to ensure your voice is heard and that you are seen and that we do what we can to protect you.
Thank you. That was the last question for which we have time. I see many, many hands up, and I wish we had more time, but as you likely know, our mission is a very popular place for people to come, and this room is very closely booked. But as a thank you, I want to actually recognize Elizabeth, who's standing at the room here. And also to name colleagues of Elizabeth. I won't name everybody, but things like flowers, microphones, chairs, coffee, water. So thank you to Lindsay, thank you to Aiden, thank you to all of the staff, and to Ambassador Bob Bay for welcoming us here today. Thank you. Go forward with force and elbows up.
Before you all leave, before everyone leaves, can we please give a round of applause to Senator McPhedran?